Brian Kelly.
How about now? Better? Everybody see me behind the podium? We're good? Adrian's asked me not to wander around a little bit because I tend to do that, so I'm going to try to stay on camera. So when they asked me to come and keynote this, they said 50, 75 on average. That's what we had before. I think we topped out over 300 for this conference. So this is really incredible to be here, for all of you to be here. This is, the 6th year of BSides Connecticut. So quick show of hands. How many been to more than one? Excellent. Show of hands, first one. Awesome. Welcome. Really important that you're here. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the BSides committee for inviting me and having me. Thanks to Central Connecticut State University for hosting. I was the CISO at Quinnipiac for a number of years. We hosted a couple of these, and I know the effort that it takes to host something like this. So this is a great venue, and hope you guys have a good day. So the original slide said, what's your origin story? But what we're going to talk about today is really a community story and how BSides plays into our community. So I'll talk a little bit about BSides as a community. I'll talk a little bit about why I'm here, right? Part of that community. Why you're here, right? Joining and participating in a community. And then we'll also talk about who else is here, right? So as you look around this room, as Roman was speaking, and you see some of the folks sitting next to you, we'll talk about who else is here, who's in our community. And then lastly, we'll sort of close with we're not alone, and it's not an alien reference. It's we need to do this as a community. And I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to go through this the old way. So black hat. So Roman's wearing a hat, right? So that's how we find Roman today. Roman's got the black hat on, right? So black hat, I was going to say, isn't the top hat that Jack Daniels is wearing, but it's not just a hat, right? It's a conference. And Black Hat was founded way back in 1997. So I was afraid at Central I was going to have an audience that wasn't born in 1997, but it looks like it's fairly well mixed this morning. So 1997, so that's a little bit of time ago, and it really, by 2009, Black Hat had become this really big hit, right? And it was the thing that started all those awkward conversations that we had with our bosses and our spouses when we said we had to go to Vegas for work, right? No, really, it's work. But what happened by 2009 was Black Hat was such a big hit, it was such the go-to conference, that there was speakers and talks that were getting rejected, that weren't finding their way into that week-long conference, right? So it had grown beyond just sort of this national, now it's an international brand. They've got logo wear, they do training. It's quite an incredible organization. And out of that came folks like Mike Murray and Mike Don and Jennifer Leggio and Jack Daniel, who started to think about what can we do with all of this sort of content that isn't making the cut for Black Hat. And out of that grew this concept of B-sides, right? The B-side. The B-side is sort of an homage back to an A and a B-side of a 78, 45, or 33.5 RPM phonographic record. Right, so this is where I lose the crowd, right? Because, well, vinyl's coming back, but for those of you that were raised in the 80s, a cassette had an A and a B side, right? And typically, the A side was what the artist wanted you to buy, that's what you were paying for, and the B side was either extra music or garbage music or a bonus, right? Bonus music. It was free music. So before there was Napster and streaming and all these things, right? The free music was you bought the A side, you got the B side. And I think bonus for me is really indicative of what B-sides is as a community, right? It's bonus, right? The content that you guys are going to experience today, show of hands for track 1 or track 2. I think most of us would like to be in both, right? How do we do both tracks simultaneously? And thankfully it's being recorded so we can go and maybe be in both places at the same time later on. So, talk about getting old, right? So 2009 was 10 years ago. So the first B-sides was in July of 2009. So this past July was the 10th birthday or the 10th anniversary of B-sides. And when we talk about these founders, these folks their names on a plaque, names that I mentioned like Jack Daniel and Mike Murray and Jennifer, to me they're not just names on a plaque or names on the B-sides history website. These are people sitting next to you. These are like both rock stars in our community and people that we can just talk to or tweet to or interact with. So for us, that is such an important part of the community. And then what I hope B-Sides will mean to you is that it will become part of your origin story. So for those of you that raised your hand and said, hey, this is my first time, you're going to meet people today, you're going to make friends, even with the vendors, you're going to make friends, and these are going to be relationships that you'll have for a lifetime. So talk a little bit about my origin story, and I went ahead on that, or the two automations didn't come in, right? So my origin story is I wanted to be a cop. My father was a cop, my grandfather was a cop, I had lots of uncles that were cops. And even though that was sort of my path growing up, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to be when I grew up, and there's some days where I'm still not really sure what I want to be when I grow up. So after high school, I worked for Amtrak for about a year. That's a story for another talk. If you've ever traveled or used Amtrak, you know that's just too long of a talk for this morning. So after high school, I went and I enrolled at Naugatuck Valley Community College in an associate's degree program in 1989. Criminal justice, right? I was going to be a law enforcement officer. In 92, I graduated with an associate's degree. So those of you that are good with math, or I know it's early on a Saturday morning, it took me 3 years to complete a 2-year associate's degree. That happens for a lot of us. Once I got done, I joined the Air Force, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But in reality, I've been at Naugatuck Valley for what feels like 30 years. So 89 to 92, I was a student. I left for a little bit, was in the Air Force. I came back to Naugatuck Valley in 1999 as an adjunct instructor teaching networking and computer courses, and really I feel like I've never left. I feel like I've been part of that community for 30 years now. So show of hands, veterans, folks that have served, are serving, thank you so much for your service. We're 2 days away from Veterans Day, so. Now I ask that you don't answer this question. So after I graduated with my associate's degree, I figured out, I was trying to think about how I could differentiate myself, how I could, I wanted to be a police officer. I was applying at every town, Naugatuck, New Britain, State Police, Waterbury, and I was trying to differentiate myself in my professional resume, not like blue hair or tattoos, but how do I build my professional resume? So I decided to talk to an Air Force recruiter, and the joke for those of you that know the answer to this is, how do you know when your recruiter is lying to you? When their lips are moving, right? So I went and I talked to an Air Force recruiter about a law enforcement or a security forces position, because that's what I wanted to do, and I thought that would best help my resume, my professional resume. What happened was this recruiter said, I don't have a law enforcement or security forces, I have this thing called a computer systems operator. And I went, what? And he said, no, you'll have a top secret clearance, so the government will trust you, and so will every municipality in the United States. So, when you're ready to go back to law enforcement, this will help you immensely. Your ASVAB scores were phenomenal. You'll do great. And I was sold. I believed him. So I took it, right? And you know what? It turned out that recruiter was right? He was onto something. I ended up really liking that computer stuff, so I sort of dug in and I learned as much as I could. Now, again, sort of dating myself, it's the mid-90s. There was this really new cool operating system coming out called Windows 95. Yeah, so I was working on that, and so my Air Force career ended in 2013. I retired from the Air National Guard. That was a huge part of community for me. I miss it every day. Don't tell my wife; she'll be mad. Oh, it's being recorded. I'm screwed. Can we fix that in post edit? Just take that out. Anyway, so. Again, it's the late 90s, it's the early 2000s, and I'm working for the Air Force full-time, and a friend, a mentor, a colleague, a gentleman by the name of Brian Sheehan, he says, you got to go out and you got to talk to people, and you got to get involved with groups, and you got to do stuff in real life, right? Because there is no LinkedIn in 2000. So he introduces me to the Information Systems Security Association, or ISSA. They had meetings in Hartford that were monthly, and what an opportunity to go there, much like today, but on a smaller scale, right? The meetings were designed for gathering people together, for networking, and for learning. But for me, what really helped me out, and I think for many of us in our sort of our origin story in our community, was learning how to sort of interact with people. So today, when folks come to you and they say, "Tell me what you're doing or what you're working on," we tend to say what we're doing or what we're working on. And those early ISSA meetings sort of helped me learn to say things like, what I'm currently doing is I'm configuring firewalls for the Air Force. Well, what's interesting is I think there's going to be an opportunity for Cigna or Aetna to use some of the things that I'm learning in what I'm doing for the Air Force. So it helped me sort of mature the story of my origin and move me from one career to the next thing. So I think as you have those conversations today, think about not only what you're doing, but where you want to go, and especially for those of us that are students. From ISSA, I was introduced to this group called the InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership. Folks familiar with InfraGard? Probably some of it, between the FBI and public and private industry. And what that did for me was really, it sort of appealed to my law enforcement background or interest, and it appealed to sort of my military background. And what a great group. I was part of the founding group here in Connecticut. We're, I think, in the 20th year now of that organization. There's probably 900 members in the state of Connecticut. It's a national organization, but there is Connecticut chapters. Not every meeting is cyber related. Sometimes they talk about shipping and electrical and power and water, but it's a great group to be involved with. And then lastly, before I left Aetna back in 2006, was as I was building this, feels like a really, really long time ago, I got introduced to this organization called the High Technology Crime Investigation Association, HTCIA. And what that was at the time, there wasn't a lot of private forensics going on. It was all law enforcement. So again, really sort of appealed the interest to my law enforcement. Sorry, if we could on the CTF hack this thermostat as like the first goal, that would be really great. It's really warm in here. So HTCIA at the time was this group of largely law enforcement in the state of Connecticut, but helped me sort of understand how to build out this forensics lab at Aetna before I left. And I was so engaged and so involved with HTCIA that they sort of elected me president, and I was president of that organization for a very long time. And if you're into forensics, computer forensics, if you've not found that community here, HTCIA, I highly recommend that you take a look at it and join. And that was my last slide there. So I'm going to be 49 in 11 days. I feel really, really old. Wait, this slide's not about me, it's about you. So what I meant to say is that I'm not as young as I think I am, or as not as young as I used to be. And what's important for this, right, this is a very quick keynote to start the day. But as you think about today, as you're sitting here, just think about we all started somewhere. So a number of you raised your hand and said this is your first time, right? Everyone in this room, whether today is your first time or today is your sixth time, we all started somewhere, right? We all started this journey together, starting from nothing, right? So I want you to keep in mind that the smartest, the coolest, the best hacker that you'll meet today or that you'll see speak today was just once like you. They were sitting here for the first time. So keep in mind that we're all sort of started at the same beginning. And for those of you that are the cool kids, like Ryan, that are really the smart hackers and the folks that we come to see, in the other tracks, just remember how important it was when you were starting out, when someone came up and talked to you, right, engaged with you, how impactful that was for you both personally and professionally. And I just strongly encourage the dialogue. I saw some great conversations going on even before this started. So, make sure you're engaging with one another. And then I have curiosity, right? So will your origin story be one of curiosity, right? So curiosity might have brought you here today. It might have brought you into the course of study here at Central that you're in. We like, as professionals, we like to think about how things break, right? So many of us might have grown up taking things apart, and some of us were better at putting them back together than others. Sometimes we like to see how things fail, how systems fail, right? How we can take something and make it do something the creator never intended to do, right? So that's part of curiosity. I think that binds us, brings us together, and that's important for us to remember. And I think there's a way to think about that and from a critical thinking or sort of question everything perspective. And then I have paranoia up there, right? So security folks in general can be accused of being paranoid. Ryan's laughing at me. Is that an understatement, right? Paranoid. Should be, right? So in that vein, we often see how things fail, right? We tend to see where there's gaps, and that's what we're trained to look at, right? And that can be perceived as paranoia. Try to be sort of a healthy paranoia if that's possible, and try to be not always sort of, the Debbie Downer, I guess, is the right answer. And then also be optimistic, right? How many security folks do you know that are optimistic? It's things that one there. Thank you. Yeah, it's always one. But But typically, we're not optimistic. We're always sort of chasing perfection, right? We've got to be right 100% of the time. The bad guys, the adversaries, only got to be right once. So, try to be optimistic. Don't chase perfection. Focus on your successes. I used to tell Alex a lot, like, there was so much that we weren't accomplishing, but there was so much that we were doing, and we always used to focus on what we didn't get done or we didn't finish. So try to be optimistic. I know it's really, really hard. We're in an academic setting. My new role at EDUCAUSE is providing cybersecurity consultation and advice to higher ed throughout the country. And back in the fall, there was 2 universities that were impacted by ransomware. Regis University near Denver and Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. And everybody in higher ed is freaking out about what happened, how they were vulnerable, how the threat propagated, what happened. But EDUCAUSE serves over 4,000 colleges and universities. So we're really concerned about 2 that got burned with ransomware. But there's 4,000 that are doing something right. And I don't think they're just being lucky. I think there's a good story to tell there. So I try to think about how we can be optimistic and focus on where we're winning, not only being in the news where there's breaches. And then sort of lastly, I don't know if this is going to work. Anybody remember the movie The Sixth Sense? All right, so most of you, that's good. I was worried. So in the movie, the kid, Holly Joel Osment, all he saw was dead people, right? So I've been accused of being like that kid, except I don't see dead people. All I see is problems, right? All you see is problems, right? So don't end up being an old curmudgeon. Don't just see problems, see solutions. And sort of that's where this community is so helpful, because the conversations that you have around things that you see as problems or things you're struggling with in your own environment, somebody sitting next to you may have that answer and may be able to help you with that. So as you look around the room, right, do you know who's sitting next to you? Do you know who's in front of you? Do you know who's behind you? Some of you maybe. So I'm not going to ask you to get up and introduce yourself. It's way too early for that. I know it's a Saturday morning. So don't. And I have like 2 more slides, so you can introduce yourself to each other on the way out as you talk about what a great keynote this was, and you're so glad you came. So, look around. Some of these speakers that are here, I look at the agenda and I look at who I want to go and see, and generally, and thankfully not this morning, there's generally somebody on the agenda the same time I'm talking that I would rather go see than myself. So think about who you came to see, besides me, of course, who you want to meet, how you want to interact with those folks today. I know many of us are introverts. I don't want to stereotype the geek and the security nerds in the space, but it happens, and it's hard. It's hard for us to, as introverts, interact with people, go up and have a conversation. Try to be purposeful about that today. Try to engage with folks. If you see someone, ask them what they're doing. You ask them what they're working on, what they're interested in. If you're not ready for that today, you don't want to, have social interaction today, but later on you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me what a great talk this was, or it wasn't. Just say that. When you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, whether it's me or if you're, studying AI at Central and you find somebody on LinkedIn that's really a leader in that space, reach out to them and say, hey, I'm in a cybersecurity program at Central. I see that you're a leader in this space. I'd love to connect with you and learn from you. I think those connections, those communities are hugely important for all of us. I was going to say, if you're not on Twitter already, the InfoSec cybersecurity hacker community on Twitter is phenomenal. There's some really great, I talk about Twitter and I worry it's going to turn into a political conversation, but specific to cybersecurity, there's a great dialogue going on out there. And then we are in an academic setting, so I have to talk about reading, right? So I'm a geek and I like to read and I like history, so I don't know if that makes me a nerdy geek or a geeky nerd. Tribe of Hackers, some of you might have read that already. A great book. It's got 70 profiles in it of folks in our community. It sort of reads like a Q&A about how they got started, what they think the future of cybersecurity is. It's a great read. I was also fortunate to be involved with the Cybersecurity Canon project, so hopefully you've heard of it. If you haven't, go ahead and Google it. Palo Alto sponsors it, but it's really an independent sort of body of knowledge of books that we should all be reading. While I was part of it, I got to meet Kevin Paulson from Wired Magazine. He wrote Kingpin. So really, I encourage you to read, whether that's audiobooks or however you consume. Just go out and read as much as you can. And this is my last slide. So my professional community began at ISSA meeting, and it really expanded through so many different organizations. Many of them are listed here, right? So I think for you, just make sure that you're including as many of these organizations, and there might be others that I'm missing because I'm an old guy. So if there's things that you know about, come up and talk to me and say, hey, Brian, you should be talking about these organizations because that's what's coming. I think, like I talked about, we're not alone. You can't learn alone. We can't learn alone. We can't succeed alone. It's so important for us to be part of the community. Connecticut is a really small state, but there's so many vibrant communities. I have some of them listed there. And with that, I'll close in saying, introverts unite. Have a great day. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you around.